A copper pot caught the lamplight, steam rising like a prayer no one had thought to say. Behind it, a tall man in a borrowed apron stirred and tasted, while 100 guests laughed in the next room. None knew his name. By midnight, the bride would learn it, and refuse to forget it for the rest of her life. Axel Lindqvist had crossed an ocean with one thing his grandmother gave him: a wooden spoon and the words carved along its handle. A man is known by what he gives when no one is watching. He had repeated it through hunger, through cold, through the long walk west. Now, stepping off the wagon into the dust of Larkspur, Colorado, he held the spoon and wondered whether anyone in this hard country would ever look closely enough to know him at all. The town of Larkspur sat in a green valley below the Front Range, prosperous and proud. Axel arrived in the autumn of 1881 with $11, a knapsack and hands that had cooked in kitchens from Stockholm to St. Louis. He had heard there was harvest work, but the fields were already cut. What he found instead was a notice tacked to the door of the mercantile. Cook wanted, one night only, the Hargrove wedding. Apply within. The mercantile belonged to Garrett Hargrove, the wealthiest man in the valley, who owned the cattle, the bank's largest account, and the manners of someone who had never once been refused. His son, Royce, was to be married. Axel learned all this from the talk while he waited, hat in hand, near the counter. The townsfolk spoke around him as though he were a coat rack, a foreigner, a drifter, someone whose vowels came out wrong. It was Royce himself who hired him, barely glancing up. "You can cook for 200? "I can," Axel said. "Then be at the house Friday before dawn. Don't speak to the guests, don't speak to my bride. Cook, and you'll be paid." Royce slid $4 across the counter as if feeding a stray. "The rest after, if it's good enough." Axel took the coins and said thank you, because his grandmother had also taught him that courtesy costs nothing and is worth everything. The bride was Solveig Brandt, daughter of a once grand family whose fortunes had thinned with her father's long illness. The marriage had been arranged the way such things were. Two ledgers balanced against each other. A young woman's future spent to settle a debt of comfort. Axel saw her only once before the wedding, crossing the yard in a gray dress, her face composed and unreadable, the face of someone who had stopped expecting to be asked what she wanted. He set up in the great kitchen of the Hargrove house, a cavern of iron stoves and copper that had clearly cost a fortune and clearly never been loved. The pots hung unused. The good knives were dull. Axel rolled his sleeves, drew water, and began to sharpen steel against stone in the dark. By the lamp he laid out what he had to work with: venison, trout from the creek, autumn squash, cream, late apples, wild thyme he'd gathered on the walk-in. Plain things, honest things. He thought of his grandmother's spoon and he began. She came into the kitchen near midnight, when she should have been asleep before her wedding day. Solveig stood in the doorway in a shawl, watching the foreigner work alone by lamplight, his sleeves dusted with flour, a dozen pots simmering in perfect order around him like an orchestra he conducted with a spoon. "You're still working," she said. It was not a question. Axel turned, startled, then bowed his head. "I was told not to speak to you, miss. I'm told a great many things." She stepped inside. On the work table sat a small dish, apples stewed soft with cream and thyme, set aside not for any guest. "What is that?" "For myself, so the long night has something sweet in it." He hesitated, then slid it toward her. "There is enough." She tasted it. Something in her face, long shut, opened the smallest crack. "What is your name?" she asked. "Axel," he said. "Lindqvist. Axel." She said it carefully, giving each sound its proper weight, and it struck him that no one in this country had ever done that before. "I'm Solveig." "I know, miss. Everyone knows." She set the empty dish down and wrapped her shawl tighter, though the kitchen was warm. For a moment she looked at the rows of simmering pots, the bread proofing under cloths, the trout laid in rows like silver coins. "You've done all this alone," she said, "for people who won't thank you. A man does the work in front of him." He returned to his squash, slicing it into even moons. "Whether they thank him is their business, not mine." She was quiet a while. Then, "Do you think it's foolish to marry where there is no—" She stopped, choosing a safer word. "Where there is no fondness." Axel kept his eyes on the knife. It was not his place. He knew it was not his place. A man with $11 in a knapsack did not give a wealthy bride opinions about her marriage on the eve of it. He could lose the rest of his pay. He could be turned out into the cold with nothing. "I think," he said slowly, "that people marry for many reasons. Land, safety, their family's comfort. These are not foolish reasons, they are real. But, he set the knife down. My grandmother used to say that a kitchen tells you everything about a house. Whether there is love in it, whether anyone has ever sat at this stove just to be warm." He gestured at the great cold cavern around them, all that costly iron, hung and gleaming and never used. "This is a beautiful kitchen, miss. No one has ever cooked in it. No one has ever wanted to." Solveig looked at the pots, the unused copper, the gleaming dead expanse of it, and Axel watched her understand that he was not only speaking of pots. "You should sleep," he said gently. "You'll want your strength tomorrow. Will it be a good supper? It will be the best I know how to make. For people who won't say your name. For the bride," he said, before he could stop himself, "who came to the kitchen at midnight." The color rose in her cheeks. She turned to go, then paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "My father used to cook," she said quietly, "before he was ill. The kitchen was the warmest room in our house." And then she was gone, up the dark stairs, leaving Axel alone with the steam and the spoon, and a feeling he had no right to. He did not sleep at all. He cooked through the small hours and into the gray dawn, and when the household woke, and the bunting was hung, and the guests began arriving in their carriages, Axel was already deep in the heat of the day's labor, sweat on his brow, the great kitchen finally alive. He told himself the midnight visit meant nothing. A bride's nerves. A kind word from a stranger because strangers are safe to speak to. He resolved to do what he was hired to do: cook the finest supper Larkspur had ever tasted, take his pay, and walk on to the next town before he let himself feel anything at all. It was a good plan. He believed in it for nearly 6 hours. The one soul who spoke to him plainly was old Wendell Pike, the Hargroves' stable hand, gray as a fence post and twice as stubborn, who wandered into the kitchen to escape the fuss. He sat on an overturned crate and watched Axel work. "You cook like a man who means it," Wendell said, accepting a heel of warm bread. "Is there another way?" "Round here mostly," Wendell chewed. "Hargroves hire hands and forget their people. Done it to me 30 years. He studied Axel. "That girl, though, the bride, she's got more sense than the whole family she's marrying into. Pity nobody asked her what she wanted. The Hargrove wedding was the grandest Larkspur had ever seen, and it ran on Axel's labor like a clock runs on its spring. He worked in a kingdom of heat and steam, and from the kitchen he heard the Holtz pageant unfold. The fiddler tuning, the murmur of 200 guests, the parson's voice carrying across the yard, and at last the brief vows that bound Solveig Brandt to Royce Hargrove under the cottonwoods. Axel did not go out to watch. He had supper to make. But he heard the cheer go up, polite and dutiful, and he noticed it was not the kind of cheer that comes from joy. It was the kind that comes from relief that a thing is done. Then the guests flooded toward the long tables set on the lawn, and the night belonged to the kitchen. What Axel produced that evening, men in Larkspur would describe to their grandchildren. He sent out trout poached in cream and wild thyme, the flesh falling apart at the touch of a fork. He sent venison braised so long and so low that it needed no knife, glossed in a sauce of late apples and dark drippings. He sent squash roasted until its edges caramelized into candy, and loaves of bread with crusts that shattered and centers like warm clouds, and butter he had churned himself at 4 in the morning because the household's butter was rancid and he would not serve it. The guests, who had not bothered to learn his name, fell silent over their plates the way a congregation falls silent in church. Forks scraped, eyes closed. A stout woman in violet asked her neighbor, in a carrying whisper, whether the Hargroves had brought a chef from Denver. From Chicago, the neighbor guessed. Surely from Chicago. Axel heard all of it through the open kitchen window and said nothing, only plated the next course and the next, his shirt soaked through, his grandmother's spoon never far from his hand. Wendell ferried dishes back and forth and brought reports like a scout returning from the front. The judge had 3 helpings of the trout. The banker's wife asked for the apple thing twice. There's a rancher out there near to weeping over the venison. Says he hasn't eaten like this since his mother passed. Wendell grinned, gap-toothed. You've conquered the whole valley and not one of 'em knows your name. That's all right, Axel said, and meant it. The work was the thing. The work was always the thing. But once, only once, he allowed himself to look. Through the window, down the length of the great table, he found the bride. Solvig sat at the place of honor in a dress the color of cream, and she was not eating, and she was not speaking, and her smile was the careful, painted-on smile of someone enduring a long performance. Beside her, Royce held court loudly, his face flushed with the punch Axel had also made, laughing at his own jokes, while his new wife sat beside him like a piece of furniture he had purchased and would soon forget. Then Solvig turned her head, as if she felt the weight of being seen, and her eyes found the kitchen window, found Axel. For one held breath, they looked at each other across the lantern-lit yard, the cook and the bride, and she did not smile her painted smile. She gave him something else, small, true, meant only for him. A nod, thank you. Axel returned to his stove with his heart doing something inconvenient in his chest. He told himself it changed nothing. She was married now. The vows were said. He would finish the dessert course, collect his pay, and be gone. By morning, a name no one remembered and a meal everyone would. That was the shape of his life, and he had made his peace with it long ago. He turned his attention to the final course, the one he had labored over most. Individual apple cakes, warm, each crowned, with the cream and thyme he had served Solveig at midnight. It was a small private joke, a thing only she would understand, and he was not entirely sure why he had built the whole dessert around a memory he had no right to keep. He was arranging them on the tray, dusting each with sugar, when the kitchen door banged open and Royce Hargrove filled the frame, glass in hand, color high, looking for entertainment the way bored, powerful men always do. So, Royce announced to the room, though Axel was the only one in it. Here's the foreigner my father dug up. Let's have a look at the help. Axel set down his spoon and straightened. Whatever was coming, he would meet it standing. They tell me, Royce went on, swirling his glass, that the guests think we brought a real chef. From Chicago, no less. He laughed, leaning against the doorframe. Imagine their faces if they knew it was some half-starved Swede I found behind a notice at the store. $4 and look at him sweat. Behind Royce, a knot of guests had drifted toward the kitchen, drawn by the loud voice and the prospect of sport. The stout woman in violet, the judge, the banker, and his wife. They clustered in the doorway, smiling the uncertain smiles of people who sense cruelty coming and have not yet decided whether to enjoy it. Say something foreign for them, Royce said. Go on, earn your supper. Axel looked at him steadily. The dessert is ready, sir. Shall I send it out while it's warm? He even talks like he's reading off a feed sack. Royce turned to his audience, delighted. My wife came down here last night. Did you know? Couldn't sleep. Found her chatting with the cook like he was company. He said it as a joke, as a small humiliation aimed at Solveig, as much as at Axel, and Axel felt the temperature of the room change. What did you two talk about, Sven? Recipes? Axel, he said quietly. What? My name is Axel. Not Sven, he said it without heat, without fear, simply correcting a fact. You asked me to say something. That is the thing I would say. A silence fell. The judge coughed. The woman in violet looked suddenly at her shoes. Royce's face darkened. He was not a man accustomed to being corrected, least of all by a man he had paid $4. He pushed off the doorframe and crossed the kitchen, and for a moment the guests tensed, expecting something ugly. But Royce only seized one of the apple cakes off the tray, The dessert Axel had built around a midnight memory and held it up for the crowd. This is what my money bought. Let's see if the Swede can cook. He took a large bite, chewed theatrically. And then, because the cake was, in fact, extraordinary, because it tasted of care and skill and a long night's honest work, an involuntary flicker of pleasure crossed his face before he could stop it. He covered it instantly with scorn. Passable, he declared, mouth full, for peasant food, and he tossed the rest of the cake onto the floor, where it broke apart on the flagstones, cream and apple and crumbs scattered across the stone. The guests laughed, because they were supposed to. Axel did not move. He looked at the ruined cake on the floor, the work of his hands, thrown down to make a rich man feel large. And then he looked up, and his face held no anger. That was the thing the guests would remember. Not rage. Something quieter and far more difficult to dismiss. He looked at Royce the way a grown man looks at a child throwing a tantrum, with patience and with something almost like pity. He bent, unhurried, and picked up the broken cake. He wiped the stone clean with a cloth. He set the ruined dessert aside without a word, took up his tray of the remaining cakes, and said to the room, "There is enough for everyone. Please. It's best while it's warm." And he carried the tray out past Royce, past the guests, into the lantern light, and began to set warm cakes before the people who had come to laugh at him, saying to each quietly, "For you, for you, for you." What no one had noticed, no one but old Wendell, who saw everything, was that Solveig had come to the edge of the crowd. She had heard it all. The $4, the mockery, some half-starved Swede. She had watched her husband of 3 hours throw a good man's labor on the floor for sport, and she had watched that good man pick it up, wipe the stone, and go out to feed the very people laughing at him, his head unbowed, his hands gentle, his grandmother's spoon tucked in his apron string. She looked at Royce, wiping cream from his mouth, basking in the laughter he'd bought. She looked at Axel, moving down the table in the lantern light. "For you." And Solveig Brandt, who had stopped expecting to be asked what she wanted, felt something rise in her that she had not felt in a long time. Not fondness. Something stronger and more dangerous. The certain clear knowledge of the difference between a man who takes and a man who gives. She set down her painted smile. She did not pick it back up. Wendell beside her murmured into his beard, "There it is." And he smiled. That night, after the carriages had rolled away and the lanterns guttered out, Solveig did not go up to the room that had been prepared for her and her new husband. She went to the kitchen. Axel was scrubbing the last pot. He turned, and there she was again in the doorway, still in her cream-colored dress, her shoes in her hand. "You picked it up," she said. "The cake. You picked it up and you fed them anyway. Wasting food is a sin where I come from. That's not why you did it." She came closer. "I've been married for 6 hours, Axel, and I have made a terrible mistake." Her voice did not shake. "I knew it before today, but today I am certain." Axel set down the pot very carefully, as a man does when the ground beneath him has shifted. "Miss," he caught himself, "Mrs. Hargrove, you're tired. The day has been long, and—" "Don't," she said it gently. "Don't tell me what I feel. Everyone in my life has told me what I feel, what I want, what is best for me. My father, when he was well, the lawyers, when he wasn't. Garrett Hargrove, who chose me for his son the way he chooses a heifer at auction. Royce, who has not asked me a single question about myself in the 4 months I've known him." She set her shoes down on the work table. "You ask my name. In a kitchen at midnight. You're the only one who did." "I am a cook with $11, Axel said, and the number had shrunk. He had spent some. $8. "I have nothing. I am nothing here. What you're feeling, it can't lead anywhere but to your ruin and mine, mister. Hargrove owns this valley. The bank, the law, near enough. I know what he owns. Then you know what he could do to a drifter who—" He stopped. The thing he could not say hung between them in the steam. "Who what?" she asked, softly. He turned away and gripped the edge of the cold stove. "It does not matter what I feel. You are married. The thing is done. In the morning I take my pay and I go, and you forget the cook, And in time, this will seem like a strange dream you had the night before your wedding. And if I don't want to forget, then you will be a married woman wanting what she cannot have, and that is the cruelest fate I know, and I would not wish it on you for anything in this world. His voice roughened. Go upstairs, Solveig, please, before someone finds you here and we cannot undo it. She did not go upstairs, but she did go, back across the dark yard to the small east room she'd insisted on for the night, claiming a bride's nerves, while Royce drank with the last of his friends in the parlor. And Axel stood alone in the kitchen with his heart in pieces on the flagstones, no easier to wipe up than the cake had been. He should have left that night, he knew it. But Garrett Hargrove had not yet paid him the balance, and a man with $8 cannot walk away from 16 owed, and so Axel lay down on a pallet in the corner of the kitchen, meaning to collect his pay at dawn and be gone before the household stirred. Dawn came, so did Garrett Hargrove. The old man entered the kitchen like weather. He was broad and gray and certain, and he did not raise his voice, which made him more frightening than his son. He set no money on the table. You're the cook, Garrett said. I am. My son tells me my new daughter-in-law spent time in this kitchen. Twice. Garrett's pale eyes moved over Axel without hurry. Once before the wedding, once after. She came for something sweet, sir. Both times. Nothing more passed between us than words. Words. Garrett let the syllables sit. I've built everything I have on knowing the difference between a thing that's nothing and a thing that's the beginning of something. You're a smart man. You know which this is. He pulled a fold of bills from his coat, far more than $16, a thick green sheaf of it, and set it on the table. $40. More than you've held in a year, I'd wager. You take it, you walk to the road, and you keep walking. You never set foot in this valley again. You never speak that woman's name. And this stays the strange dream it ought to be. Axel looked at the money. $40. A new start anywhere. The sensible thing. The safe thing. And if I don't take it? He asked. Garrett smiled, and the smile had no warmth in it at all. Then I'll make sure no kitchen between here and the Mississippi ever hires you again. I have friends, son. I have a long reach and a longer memory. Take the money. It's the kindest thing I'll ever offer you. Axel looked at the $40 on the work table for a long moment. Then he looked at the great cold kitchen, the unused copper, the dead iron that had finally, for one night, been alive. You have a fine kitchen, Mr. Hargrove, he said. Nobody's ever cooked in it. Nobody's ever wanted to. I think that's true of most things in this house. Garrett's jaw tightened. $40, cook, yes or no? I'll take what I'm owed, Axel said. $16 for the supper. Not a cent more and not your 40. I don't sell silence, I never have. He picked up his knapsack. I'll go from the valley because that's the decent thing, for her sake, not yours. But I won't be paid to pretend a good woman is a piece of property. That's the one job I won't take. For a moment, Garrett Hargrove simply stared, unaccustomed to a poor man refusing his money. Then he counted out $16 with cold precision and let it fall to the table. Be gone within the hour, he said, and left. Axel gathered his few things. He did not go to find Solveig. That would only deepen her trouble. He told himself again that walking away was the kindest gift he could give her, to remove the temptation, to leave her marriage intact, to vanish like the dream the Hargroves wanted him to be. He told himself it was love that made him go. He was halfway down the road to town, his knapsack on his shoulder, and the mountains gold in the morning light, when Wendell Pike caught up to him on a borrowed mule. Where do you think you're going? The old man demanded. Away, it's better, for her. Better, Wendell snorted, swinging down stiff from the saddle. You know what that girl did this morning? Walked into Garrett Hargrove's study and told him, to his face, that the marriage was a mistake and she means to undo it, annulment. Says it was never a true marriage, signed under her father's debts, never of her own free will. Says there's law for it. Wendell shook his head in admiration. She's not running to you, fool. She didn't even know you were leaving. She's doing it for herself. Found her own spine. And here you are, sneaking off down the road, taking the choice away from her, same as everybody else in her life ever did. Axel stopped walking. You came down to my kitchen, Wendell pressed. And you told me you cook because the work's the thing, whether anyone thanks you or not. You fed 200 people who wouldn't learn your name. You picked a cake up off the floor and served it to the folks laughing at you. And now, the one time it counts, the one time there's a person who did learn your name and does want you to stay. You're walking away because it's hard, because that Hargrove looked at you cold. Wendell spat in the dust. That's not decency, son. That's just running. Dressed up pretty, but running. Axel stood in the road a long time. Behind him, town. Ahead, the open country and the next anonymous kitchen, the safe, small, lonely life he had made his peace with. He'll ruin me, Axel said quietly. He said as much. No kitchen between here and the Mississippi. Maybe. Wendell climbed back onto the mule. Or maybe a man who can cook like you don't need anybody's permission. Maybe a man could open his own door for once, instead of always standing at someone else's. He turned the mule back toward the ranch. She's facing the whole valley alone right now, in that cold house, with that cold old man telling her she's ruined her life. You want to talk about decency? Decency is not letting her stand there by herself, and he rode off, leaving Axel alone on the road with his knapsack and his grandmother's spoon and a choice. For a long moment, Axel did not move. The sensible thing was to keep walking. The safe thing, the thing he had done his whole life. Take the work in front of him, ask for nothing, expect nothing, leave before anyone could leave him first. He set down the knapsack in the dust. He took out the spoon and read the worn words carved along the handle. A man is known by what he gives when no one is watching. But someone at last had been watching. By the time Axel walked back up the long drive, it was too late, or seemed to be. A buggy stood at the door. Inside the parlor, through the window, he could see them. Garrett Hargrove, Royce, a thin man in a black coat who could only be a lawyer, and Solveig, standing alone before all three. Their voices came muffled through the glass, but the shapes of the words were plain. They were telling her she had no money, no family standing, no proof of anything, that an annulment would brand her, that she would leave with nothing and no one. A ruined woman in a hard country, with a sick father's debts and not a friend in the valley to take her in. And Solveig, alone, was beginning to waver. Axel stood outside the window, unseen, and watched the woman who had learned his name being slowly worn down by three men who never would. He understood then the true shape of what he'd done by leaving. He had told himself it was love. But Wendell was right. It had been fear wearing love's coat. He had been so certain that the kindest thing was to disappear that he had never once asked her what she wanted. The same crime as all the rest of them. He had treated his own heart the way the Hargroves treated their kitchen. Something too costly to ever actually use, hung up gleaming and cold, admired and never lived in. His whole life, he had given freely to strangers and kept nothing for himself. Not a home, not a hope, not a single person who knew his name. He had called it humility. Standing in the cold dawn, watching Solveig's shoulders begin to bow under the weight of three powerful men, he understood it had also been a kind of cowardice. It is easy to cook for people who will never know you. It is hard, so much harder, to stand in the lantern light and let yourself be seen. He thought of the apple cake on the flagstones. He had picked it up. He had not let them ruin it. He had served it warm to the very people who laughed. He could do that for a dessert. Surely he could do it for a life. Axel walked to the door and he opened it. Every head turned. Royce half rose. Garrett's face went hard as flint. The lawyer blinked. But Axel did not look at any of them. He looked at Solveig and he spoke to her alone, as if the powerful men in the room were so much furniture. You asked me last night if I thought it foolish to marry where there is no fondness, he said. I gave you a careful answer because I was afraid. Here is the true one. You deserve a house with love in it. A kitchen someone wants to stand in. I left because I was a coward. I came back to ask what you want. Get out of my house, Garrett Hargrove said, very low. In a moment, Axel answered, still watching Solvig, when she's told me to. Royce surged forward, fists balled, his face mottled. But Solveig stepped between them, not toward her husband, but toward the cook, and the simple fact of where she placed her body said everything before she spoke a word. I want, she said slowly, finding the words as she went, the way a person finds footing on river stones, what I have wanted since I was a girl and my father was well and our kitchen was warm. I want a life that is mine, chosen by me, not paid for, not arranged, not settled like a debt. She turned to Garrett. You said I'd leave with nothing. You're wrong. I came into this house with nothing but my father's debts and my own two hands. I'll leave the same way, lighter by the debts, because the annulment voids them too. Your lawyer knows it. Ask him. The thin man in the black coat shifted, uncomfortable. Garrett's eyes cut to him. Is that so? The lawyer cleared his throat. The marriage contract assumed the union. It assumed her father's obligations as part of the arrangement. If the union is voided on grounds that she was contracted under duress, signed while her father was incapacitated, with no independent counsel of her own, then the financial terms void with it. She would owe you nothing. And the circumstances, he hesitated, glancing at Royce. The circumstances would not reflect well on this family should they be aired. A bride contracted against her will. It would be the talk of the territory. For the first time in his life, perhaps, Garrett Hargrove was looking at a ledger that did not balance in his favor. He had built everything on knowing the difference between a thing that was nothing and a thing that was the beginning of something. He looked at his son, red-faced, useless, the boy who had thrown a good man's work on the floor for sport and could not even hold the wife his father had bought him. He looked at the foreigner standing quiet and unafraid in his doorway. He looked at the young woman who had walked into his study at dawn and told him to his face that she would undo what he had arranged. And Garrett Hargrove, who was many hard things but was not a stupid man, performed the only calculation left to him. The annulment, he said tightly. To the lawyer, draw it up, quietly. Her father's debts dissolved. She leaves today, and this family never speaks of it again, and neither does she. He turned his pale gaze on Axel, nor him. I want them gone from this valley by sundown, the both of them, and I never want to hear either name again. That suits me, Axel said. And me, said Solvig. Royce found his voice at last, ugly and high. You're choosing him? A drifter? A cook? You'll starve in a ditch by winter. I'd rather starve in a ditch beside a man who picks the cake up off the floor, Solveig said, than feast at a table with one who throws it down. And she walked to the door to stand beside Axel, and she did not look back. They left the Hargrove ranch that morning with the annulment promised, in writing, and her father's debts dissolved with it. They left with her 2 hands and his $8 and a wooden spoon. And that was all, and it was enough. But the valley is wide, and word travels faster than a buggy. By the time Axel and Solvig reached town, the story of the wedding supper had already run from porch to porch. The chef from Chicago, who was no chef from Chicago at all, the foreigner Royce Hargrove had mocked and called a half-starved Swede, the man who picked the broken cake up off the floor and fed the very people laughing at him. 200 guests had tasted that supper. Not one of them had forgotten it. The judge was waiting on the mercantile porch. The same judge who'd taken 3 helpings of the trout. He was a thinner-skinned man than the Hargroves, and he did not care for what he'd watched happen in that kitchen doorway, and he had a vacant building on the main street that had been a failed dry goods store. I hear you're leaving the valley, the judge said to Axel. I am, Mr. Hargrove's orders. Hargrove owns a great deal, the judge said mildly. He doesn't own me, and he doesn't own that empty storefront on Main, and he doesn't own the appetite of every soul in this county who ate at that wedding and has talked of nothing else since. He produced a key from his vest pocket and held it out. Reasonable rent, a stove in the back already. The town could use a place to eat that isn't the saloon. He almost smiled. I'd start you a line of credit myself. I've had your venison. So has half the valley. They'll come. Axel looked at the key. He looked at Solveig. My father cooked, she said quietly, and her eyes were bright. The kitchen was the warmest room in our house. I know how to keep books. I know this valley, and I know, now, exactly what a good man looks like. She put her hand over his, over the key. Let's stand in a kitchen someone wants to stand in, ours. Axel Lindquist, who had crossed an ocean with $11 and a wooden spoon, who had cooked in 100 kitchens for people who never learned his name, took the key. They named the place simply the Warm Room. It opened that autumn and never had an empty table again. The judge came every Friday. Old Wendell Pike took his supper there nightly, free of charge, in the place of honor by the window, because Axel said, a man who turns you back from the wrong road has earned his bread for life. The rancher who'd wept over the venison brought his whole family. Even the stout woman in violet became a regular, and learned at last to say Axel with each sound in its proper place. Garrett Hargrove never set foot inside, but his cattle hands did, and his bank clerks, and once, just once, late when he thought no one would see, Royce stood across the street in the dark, watching the warm windows of the full and happy room he had thrown away, before he turned and walked home alone. A copper pot caught the lamplight, steam rising like a prayer finally answered. Behind it, a tall man in his own apron stirred and tasted, while a room full of guests laughed and ate at tables he was glad to fill. Every one of them knew his name now. They called it out in greeting when the bell above the door rang. At the work table beside him, a woman in a plain blue dress kept the books and stole tastes from his spoon, and called him by name in the way that gave each sound its proper weight. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. Someone had wanted to stand in it. On the wall above the stove hung a wooden spoon, retired now, its carved words worn but true.